It's May 1st, 2015. In the skies of Jalisco, Mexico, a military helicopter is tracking the country's most wanted man. A ghost who has built an empire on a foundation of unprecedented brutality. Suddenly, from the ground, a projectile is fired. The helicopter, a Cougar from the Air Force, plummets in flames. An act of defiance that demonstrates the firepower of a cartel that isn't afraid to confront the state. The man who orchestrated this attack, the target of the manhunt, has managed to escape once again, leaving a trail of 8 dead soldiers and a federal police officer. His name, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho. But who really is this man who went from farming avocados in poverty to leading the criminal organization that the United States government itself has labeled the most dangerous in the world? Was he simply a product of the violence and corruption that have plagued Mexico? Or a methodical and bloodthirsty strategist who knew how to exploit the weaknesses of his rivals to forge a global drug trafficking empire? Join me as we delve into the origins of the man whose boundless ambition and thirst for power turned him into one of the most enigmatic and feared figures in contemporary organized crime. A leader who, unlike other kingpins, has opted for a low-profile life, becoming a lethal specter in the war on drugs. If you're passionate about the stories that the powerful wanted to hide, subscribe. What's coming is even darker. Nemesio Cervantes, the man the world would come to know as El Mencho, was born on July 17, 1966, into a humble family in the rural area of Michoacán, Mexico, a region known for its natural beauty and, increasingly, for its endemic violence. Raised in poverty, his childhood was marked by hardship and hard work. The Oseguera family was dedicated to cultivating avocados, and from a very young age, Nemesio was forced to drop out of school in just the 5th grade to work in the fields. This environment of difficulties and few opportunities forged in him a resilient character and an insatiable ambition to escape the life he had been dealt. In his adolescence, like so many other young men of his generation, he saw the United States as an opportunity for a better life. He crossed the border illegally and settled in California, where he quickly became involved in the world of small-scale crime. Along with his brother Abraham, he began selling drugs on the streets of San Francisco, attempting to build a network of clients. However, his initial criminal career was brief and unsuccessful. In 1986, he was arrested, and in 1992, he and his brother were sentenced to federal prison on charges of heroin trafficking. After serving his sentence, he was deported to Mexico in the early 1990s. Upon his return, far from reintegrating into civilian life, he used his experience in the world of crime to take a surprising step. He joined the municipal police force of Tomatlan in the state of Jalisco. This brief stint in law enforcement provided him with invaluable knowledge about police tactics, corruption networks, and the inner workings of the system. He would later dedicate himself to fighting and corrupting. It was during this time that he met and married Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, a strategic move that would change his life forever. Rosalinda was no ordinary woman. She was a member of the Valencia clan, a powerful family with a long history in drug trafficking, founders of the Milenio cartel. This marriage not only gave him a family but also introduced him to the upper echelons of organized crime, strengthening his position and opening doors to a world of power and wealth he never could have imagined. He left the police force and fully integrated into the structure of the Milenio cartel, which at that time operated as an ally of the powerful Sinaloa cartel. The Milenio cartel, also known as the Valencia cartel, had its roots in Michoacan and had started in the drug trade by trafficking marijuana hidden in avocado shipments, which earned them the nickname the Avocado Cartel. Over time, they diversified their operations to include opium poppies and synthetic drugs. El Mencho, with his cunning and a reputation for being extremely violent, began to rise rapidly through the ranks. He served as a member of the cartel's armed wing, protecting the leader. Armando Valencia Cornelio, alias El Maradona, and leading a group of sicarios, or hitmen, in the brutal war against their rivals, especially Los Zetas. He was not a simple thug. He proved to be a charismatic leader and an intelligent strategist, earning the loyalty of his men and the trust of his superiors. His knowledge of both sides of the border, his police experience, and his innate cruelty made him an invaluable asset to the organization. The stage was set for his ascent, one that would occur amidst the fragmentation and violence that would define the next decade of Mexico's drug war. The apprentice was about to surpass his masters, and the empire he would build would be more violent and expansive than any the country had ever seen. Behind every fortune, there is a story no one dares to tell. You already know where to find it. Subscribe for more. The 2000s were a period of cataclysmic changes in Mexico's organized crime landscape. The government's offensive against the major kingpins, supported by the United States, led to the downfall of many historic leaders and the fragmentation of the dominant cartels. This chaos created a power vacuum that was exploited by emerging figures, and no one did it with more audacity and brutality than Nemesio Seguera Cervantes. His rise from sicario to supreme capo was forged in the fire of betrayals and internal wars that dismantled his former bosses. The turning point came in 2010. Ignacio Nacho Coronel, a high-ranking leader of the Sinaloa cartel and the main protector of the Milenio cartel in Jalisco, was killed in a military operation. Shortly after, Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia, alias El Lobo, leader of the Milenio cartel, was captured. The fall of the two pillars that held the structure together left the organization adrift and plunged it into a bloody internal struggle for control. From this fracture, two rival factions were born: La Resistencia, the Resistance, and Los Torcidos, the Twisted. El Mencho, along with other members like Eric Valencia Salazar, El 85, led Los Torcidos, who clashed with their former comrades in a war for control of the routes in Jalisco. It was in this context of war that El Mencho founded his own organization. Initially, the group operated as an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel with a specific mission: to exterminate their arch-enemies, Los Zetas, in strategic territories like Veracruz. They called themselves Los Matazetas, the Zeta Killers, presenting themselves through propaganda videos as a vigilante group that promised to free society from the kidnappings and extortions of their rivals. This public relations campaign, though cynical, was effective in gaining a degree of legitimacy and justifying their extreme violence. By September 2011, the group was no longer just a death squad. They formally introduced themselves as the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, marking their independence and their ambition to become a dominant force. The final break with the Sinaloa cartel would be consolidated around 2013, following the capture of a nephew of Nacho Coronel, which unleashed an open war between the former allies for control of the plazas, or territories. The CJNG no longer answered to anyone. The growth of the CJNG was exponential, driven by a combination of key factors. First, El Mencho's audacity and boundless violence. Unlike the Sinaloa cartel, which often preferred bribery and negotiation, the CJNG imposed its control through terror, intimidation, and the spectacular displays of force. Second, his business vision. El Mencho diversified the cartel's activities beyond drug trafficking, venturing into extortion, kidnapping, fuel theft, known as huachicoleo, illegal mining, and even controlling the avocado trade in Michoacán. Third, his strategic alliance with the Los Queenies clan, led by his brother-in-law Abigail González Valencia. Considered one of the wealthiest drug trafficking organizations in the world, Los Queenies became the financial arm of the CJNG, providing the necessary funds to finance its expansion and launder profits through a vast empire of legitimate businesses, including hotels, restaurants, and beauty salons. This symbiosis between El Mencho's brute force and the financial sophistication of Los Queenies created an incredibly powerful criminal superstructure. The CJNG not only grew in Mexico, but rapidly expanded its operations globally. Taking advantage of the weakening of other cartels, they seized control of strategic ports on the Pacific and Atlantic coasts, such as Manzanillo and Veracruz. This allowed them to control drug export routes to Europe, Asia, and Australia, and the import of chemical precursors from Asia for the production of synthetic drugs. By 2014, the DEA already considered them one of the most prolific and violent criminal organizations in the world, with a presence in at least 14 Mexican states and operations on every continent. Their rapid expansion redefined the drug trafficking map, turning the CJNG into the main rival of the Sinaloa cartel and unleashing a war at a national and international level that has significantly contributed to the increase in violence throughout Latin America. El Mencho had gone from being a pawn in the game to becoming the new king, and his reign of terror was just beginning. The criminal empire of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was built on foundations of extreme violence and a shrewd propaganda campaign. The Jalisco New Generation cartel distinguished itself from its rivals by its willingness to use unmeasured brutality, not only against other cartels, but also directly against the Mexican state, a tactic that few had dared to employ with such audacity. The CJNG didn't limit itself to confrontations. It resorted to terror tactics to sow fear among the population and security forces. They became notorious for their beheadings, dissolving bodies in acid, and publishing execution videos, often with messages aimed at their enemies. Their cruelty reached such a point that it was reported they trained new hitmen by forcing them to commit acts of cannibalism with their victims. This reputation for ferocity allowed them to take control of territories with relative speed, as resistance was often annihilated in the most gruesome way possible. Their challenge to the government reached unprecedented levels, with direct attacks on military convoys, the downing of helicopters, and the assassination of hundreds of police officers and public officials. Parallel to this campaign of terror, the CJNG developed a sophisticated propaganda strategy. Through social media, they disseminated videos in which they presented themselves as a paramilitary force with uniformed combatants, military-grade tactical gear, and an impressive arsenal that included .50 caliber sniper rifles. A trusted messenger from bin Laden's inner circle. The CIA invested years in tracking al-Kuwaiti, a man who moved between Pakistan and the Persian Gulf without leaving a digital trace. In 2007, intelligence agents finally managed to trace a phone call from al-Kuwaiti, which led them to a house in Peshawar. From that moment on, the trail became clearer. A year later, in 2009, the messenger was followed to a mysterious mansion in Abbottabad, Pakistan. What they found in Abbottabad was an anomaly. The mansion, just a few miles from a prestigious Pakistani military academy, was a fortress with no windows on the ground floor and walls over 16 feet high. It had no telephone or internet service, and its residents burned their trash instead of leaving it for collection. These eccentricities, along with the fact that its owner was a mysterious man who never appeared in public, made CIA analysts suspicious. The resident, it was believed, was a very wealthy and powerful man who did not want to be seen, which perfectly fit the profile of Osama bin Laden. In the following months, the CIA monitored the compound relentlessly. A drone and other surveillance equipment confirmed that a tall figure matching bin Laden's height was walking inside. The mystery of the Abbottabad house had been solved. The world's most wanted man was not in a cave in the mountains, as many believed. He was living comfortably, hidden in plain sight, less than a mile from Pakistan's military elite. In the utmost secrecy, an elite team was trained for the final mission, an operation that would end the decade-long manhunt. The end of the ghost of bin Laden was about to be written, not by a missile, but with the cold blood of an elite commando unit. After a nearly decade-long hunt, the world was astonished to learn that the planet's most wanted man was living in a fortified compound just miles from a military academy. The ghost of Osama bin Laden had been located. Now, the only question was how to capture or kill him. The risk of a military operation on the soil of Pakistan, a nominal ally, was enormous, as it could trigger a diplomatic crisis and endanger the lives of the soldiers. Therefore, President Barack Obama approved a clandestine operation to be carried out by an elite team, SEAL Team 6. The mission, codenamed Operation Neptune Spear, was rehearsed in an exact replica of the Abbottabad compound in the United States. The plan was bold and risky, depending on absolute precision and the element of surprise. On the night of May 2011, two U.S. Special Forces helicopters took off from a base in Afghanistan. They flew low in complete silence, deep inside Pakistani airspace. The incursion was made in darkness, without the involvement of Pakistani forces, which underscored the United States' distrust of its supposed ally. The operation, which was supposed to last less than an hour, began to go wrong as soon as the helicopters entered the compound. The main rotor of one of the helicopters failed due to the thin air, causing the aircraft to make a controlled crash inside the courtyard. Despite the setback, the SEALs moved with lethal precision. They entered the compound, went up the stairs, and confronted the residents. On the third floor, they found a tall, thin man. The man who had been hiding behind one of his wives was identified in seconds. The leader of Al-Qaeda, the mastermind of the September 11th attacks, had been found. In a brief and violent confrontation, a SEAL shot Osama bin Laden in the head and chest, killing him instantly. The operation, which had lasted just over 40 minutes, was a complete success. The SEAL transmitted the key signal to his commander. Geronimo, Geronimo, Geronimo. The face of terror had fallen. The ghost who had eluded Western intelligence for a decade had finally been brought down. After bin Laden's death, The SEALs collected his body and a large amount of intelligence material, including computers, hard drives, and documents. Then, with the helicopter that had failed, they returned to the base in Afghanistan. Bin Laden's body, to prevent his grave from becoming a place of pilgrimage, was taken to a U.S. Navy warship in the Arabian Sea and buried at sea in accordance with Islamic tradition. With the announcement of Bin Laden's death, the whole world felt a sense of relief. But for many, the feeling of justice was bittersweet. The end of the hunt was not the end of the war. The death of Osama bin Laden was, without a doubt, a monumental achievement in the fight against terrorism. It demonstrated that there is no safe haven for those who commit atrocities. However, in the grand scheme of things, his death was the end of a chapter, not the book. Al-Qaeda, the organization he had founded, had been decentralized, and in his absence, leadership passed to his lieutenants, who lacked his charisma and strategic vision. But bin Laden's legacy was not just Al-Qaeda. His ideology of global jihad had taken deep root in the Muslim world. With the instability that followed the Arab Spring and the chaos in countries like Syria and Iraq, even more radical and brutal groups emerged from the ashes of Al-Qaeda. The most notable of these was the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. Although ISIS split from Al-Qaeda over ideological and tactical differences, its main goal of establishing a global caliphate was a direct consequence of bin Laden's vision. His legacy of chaos and terror showed that an ideology can be harder to kill than a man. The story of Osama bin Laden is the story of a man who, with a combination of wealth, ambition, and a twisted ideology, managed to change the course of history. Although his life ended in a fortress in Pakistan, the terrorism he incubated lives on. His figure continues to inspire a new generation of extremists around the world. The war he declared in 1996 did not end with his death in 2011. On the contrary, it has transformed and become more decentralized, which makes it even harder to combat. In the end, bin Laden not only managed to humiliate the United States, but he also left a legacy of endless conflict, a scar on the social and political fabric of the world that will take decades or even centuries to heal. The story of Osama bin Laden is a grim reminder that sometimes the most destructive ideas are born not from poverty, but from the deepest and most dangerous arrogance. Thank you for traveling with us through the dark and complex history of Osama bin Laden. If this documentary left you with a new perspective, and you are passionate about biographies that reveal the truth behind the figures who changed the world, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. This way, you won't miss our upcoming videos and can continue to explore the lives of the most fascinating and controversial characters in history. See you next time. It's August 31st, 1997. On the streets of Paris, a black Mercedes speeds through a tunnel, fleeing a crowd of photographers. Inside is the most photographed woman in the world. Suddenly, a metallic crash shatters the night. The car has smashed into a pillar. When rescue teams arrive at the scene, they find the world's most beloved woman, gravely injured. A few hours later, her death is announced, a shock that paralyzes the planet. The news spreads like wildfire. The people's princess is dead. Her name, Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales. But before we delve into the story of the woman who forever changed the British monarchy, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories that have shaped the world. And tell us in the comments, was Diana solely a fairy tale princess hounded by the press, or a cunning strategist who, from the depths of an unhappy marriage, wove a legacy of empathy capable of challenging the entire royalty? The woman that history would remember as Diana, Princess of Wales, came into the world on July 1st, 1961. Her birth did not take place in a palace, but at Park House, a residence located on the royal estate of Sandringham in the county of Norfolk, England. She was christened Diana Frances Spencer. From the beginning, her life was intertwined with royalty, an irony that would deepen as she grew. Her father, Edward John Spencer, was Viscount Althorp, the only son of the 7th Earl Spencer. The Spencer family prided itself on being one of Great Britain's most prominent aristocratic lines, with a family tree tracing back to figures as influential as John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, a statesman and general who dominated the European political and military scene in the late 17th century. The blood of nobility ran through Diana's veins. Viscount Spencer, an elite-educated man, spent his youth at the Royal Military College at Sandhurst during the early years of World War II. He later served as a captain in the Royal Scots Greys Cavalry Regiment, where his contribution to the Allied invasion of Europe in the summer of 1944 was recognized. Spencer led a British unit that successfully liberated 2 French towns, an experience that marked him. After the war, he continued his career in public service, acting as an aide to the Governor of South Australia and holding local offices in England as a county councillor and Justice of the Peace. His ascent would culminate in 1975 when he inherited his father's title, becoming the 8th Earl Spencer and joining the House of Lords, the unelected arm of the British Parliament, until his death in 1992. Diana's mother, Frances Ruth Roche, also came from nobility. Born on January 20, 1936, in the very same Park House, she was the daughter of a baron who, in a twist of fate, cultivated a close friendship with King George VI. Her mother, in turn, was a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Consort. Frances and Edward married in 1954 at Westminster Abbey. They had 5 children: Sarah, Jane, a son named John who tragically died hours after birth, Diana, and finally Charles. The loss of John was a devastating blow to the family, a wound that marked the family dynamic and, in retrospect, may have sown the seeds of instability. The marriage of Frances and Edward, which from the outside seemed a pillar of the aristocracy, crumbled, and they divorced in 1969. Reports from the time suggest the Viscount had a violent temper. Diana, at just 7 years old, witnessed one of these episodes when her father slapped her mother. Although custody of the children was granted to the Viscount, leading Diana to live with her father on the family estate, the experience of seeing her parents' marriage collapse marked her deeply. Frances moved to a relatively isolated life on the Scottish island of Sale. Although she tried to maintain a low profile, incidents like a ban for drunk driving or conflicts with Diana occasionally brought her into the press. Growing up as a child of divorce, Diana was aware of the complications this brought. Little did she know that her own married life would not only repeat the pattern, but do so on a global scale. A whirlwind of emotions and public scrutiny that none of her childhood experiences could have prepared her for. Diana's education was as turbulent as her childhood. After a few years of homeschooling, in 1970 she was enrolled at Riddlesworth Hall School. Later, in 1974, she attended the Westheath boarding school in Kent. Despite describing her time there as the happiest days of my life, Diana struggled academically. Although she showed talent for music, swimming, and dancing, she failed her exams twice. In 1977, she moved to Switzerland to attend the Institut Alpin Wiedemannet, a finishing school designed to prepare young women for life in high society, teaching them etiquette and protocol. This was a reflection of her position, a preparation not for a career, but for a social role. It was precisely in 1977, at a grouse shoot on the family estate of Althorp, that 16-year-old Diana met the man who would shape her destiny, Prince Charles. At the time, Charles was dating Diana's older sister, Sarah. Although Sarah and Charles's romance was brief, the prince and Diana met. Charles described her as jolly, amusing, and attractive. For her part, Diana joked with friends about the idea of marrying him. At that time, Charles was still in contact with Camilla Parker Bowles, his youthful love, who was already married. The royal family had deemed Camilla unsuitable for the heir due to her lack of titles and her reputation. But the connection between them was undeniable and persistent. Diana's destiny was already intertwined with a love story that was not her own. After leaving school in 1978, Diana worked several low-paying jobs. She was a nanny for an American couple, a dance instructor, a cleaner, a party hostess, and finally a nursery school assistant at the Young England School in Pimlico. For her 18th birthday, her mother bought her an apartment in central London at Coleherne Court, where she lived with 3 roommates. These years were a period of liberation for Diana, who finally had the chance to enjoy a normal life, away from the struggles of her childhood and the strict aristocratic life. Despite her parents' abusive relationship and the terrible relationship she had with her stepmother, Rain McCorquodale, whom she described as a bully, Diana had transformed from a shy girl into a confident and beautiful woman, ready to mingle with the most powerful people in the country. In November 1978, Diana was invited to Prince Charles's 30th birthday celebration at Buckingham Palace. Far from being intimidated by the surroundings or the company, Diana was fascinated by the event and the people. She made a good impression on the prince, and their relationship began to take a more serious path. In the following years, tragedies befell the royal family. In August 1979, Lord Mountbatten, Charles's great-uncle and a father figure to him, was assassinated by the IRA. Devastated, Charles sought comfort from Camilla. The relationship between them intensified, fueling rumors in the press. Despite Charles's obvious closeness to Camilla, the prince focused his attention on Diana. In July 1980, they met again at a party in Sussex, where Charles showered her with affection, marking the beginning of their official courtship. Diana was invited to stay with him in London, and the royal family began to assess the relationship. 2 months later, in September, she was invited to Queen Elizabeth's Scottish residence, Balmoral Castle. The visit, known to the media as the Balmoral Test, was a scrutiny of her fitness to become the future queen consort. Diana passed the test. The queen found her charming and appropriate, and Diana and Charles received her blessing. From that moment on, Diana's life was no longer private. The press pounced, publishing stories about her, and the privacy she had briefly enjoyed vanished forever. With media attention growing ever more intense, the royal family decided to take action. In early 1981, Prince Philip advised his son to get engaged to Diana to stop the press harassment. Charles proposed to her at Windsor Castle on February 6th. She accepted. On February 24th, the couple officially announced their engagement. Controversy arrived immediately during an interview with the BBC. When the journalist asked if they were in love, Diana responded with a sincere, "Of course," while Charles added, "Whatever in love means." For many, this phrase was an omen of the future of a marriage that seemed like a fairy tale, but was built on a foundation of sand from the very beginning. For Diana, it was a warning sign, a foreshadowing of the coldness and detachment to come. What the press and the public saw as the beginning of a fairy tale was, for Diana, a period of immense loneliness and anxiety. At 19, she was moved to Clarence House, the Queen Mother's residence, to prepare for her new role. She left behind her roommates and the life of relative freedom she had known. The harassment from the media was relentless. Thousands of photographers followed her every step, capturing every gesture, every expression. She felt like the world was watching her, a feeling that became a constant in her life. The pressure and anxiety manifested in a devastating form: bulimia nervosa. The illness that would torment her for most of her life was triggered in the weeks leading up to the wedding. The stress of public scrutiny, combined with Charles's cold distance, who didn't seem to understand her suffering, pushed her into this eating disorder. The bulimia started the week after we got engaged, she would confess years later. My husband put his hand on my waistline and said, "Oh, a bit chubby here, aren't we?" And that triggered something in me. And the Camilla thing. Because the shadow of Camilla Parker Bowles was not a fantasy. It was a palpable reality. The same week of the engagement, Diana discovered a package in Charles's office containing a bracelet engraved with the initials G and F, referring to Gladys and Fred, the pet names Charles and Camilla used for each other. For Diana, it was a confirmation of her worst fears. She felt betrayed even before saying, "I do." When she confronted Charles, he dismissed her fears, downplaying the situation and assuring her it was just a farewell gift. The innocent and lonely Diana, without a real support network within the monarchy, was forced to swallow her pain and anger in a desperate attempt to fit in. On July 29, 1981, the entire world and more than 750 million viewers from 74 countries tuned into their televisions to witness what was proclaimed the wedding of the century. Diana, in an ivory silk taffeta dress with puffy sleeves, a voluminous skirt, and a 25-foot-long train, looked stunning. The dress, created by designers David and Elizabeth Emanuel, was a symbol of the fairy tale fantasy the monarchy wanted to sell. As she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, the world saw a princess who looked like she had stepped out of a storybook. But the reality was far more complex. As she walked, her gaze searched for Camilla Parker Bowles in the crowd, a gray-haired figure in a hat that Diana thought she saw. The ceremony was a spectacle of pomp and pageantry, with majestic hymns, a royal procession, and the image of Charles and Diana on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, sealing their union with a kiss to the delight of the ecstatic crowd. Despite moments of nervousness, like when Diana mixed up Charles's full name during the vows, the wedding was a resounding success for the monarchy's image. They had found a beautiful, charismatic young princess who could revitalize the institution. The wedding was the pinnacle of the fairy tale, but the honeymoon was the abrupt awakening to harsh reality. The trip, which included a voyage on the royal yacht Britannia, was marked by emotional distance. For Charles, the honeymoon was more a continuation of his duties than a moment of intimacy. Diana, for her part, was still tormented by bulimia and jealousy. During the trip, she found pictures of Camilla in Charles's diary and discovered he wore cufflinks with Camilla's initials engraved on them. For a young woman who had dreamed of a fairy tale love, the reality was a nightmare. Instead of finding comfort and affection, Diana felt more alone than ever. Charles, accustomed to a life of independence and a circle of friends that included Camilla, didn't understand his young wife's desperation. He didn't know how to handle her crying spells or her moments of sadness. Royal biographer Jonathan Dimbleby later recounted that Charles admitted to being a young man with no experience in life. However, Charles's lack of empathy made Diana feel even more isolated. She felt as if there was no place in his life for a new wife and her emotional problems. The birth of their sons, Prince William in 1982 and Prince Harry in 1984, became the beacon of light in Diana's life. She immersed herself in motherhood with a passion that contrasted with royal traditions. Unlike previous generations who left their children in the care of nannies, Diana refused to follow protocol. She wanted to be a hands-on mother. She was involved in every aspect of her son's upbringing. She chose their clothes, took them to school, attended their sporting events, and even knelt to hug them in public. A display of affection that was extraordinary for a member of the royal family. This maternal approach earned her the love and admiration of the public. People saw her as a real royal, but at the same time, a family mother just like any other. It was in this role that the image of the people's princess was forged. A woman who seemed to understand the concerns of ordinary people, even while living in opulence. This approach, however, clashed with royal protocol and created tension in her marriage with Charles. He saw it as a challenge to centuries of tradition, while she simply wanted to be a mother. The birth of Harry was a particularly painful experience for Diana. She knew it was going to be a boy, but Charles wanted a girl. Diana, fearing her husband's disappointment, decided to hide the baby's sex from him until Harry was born. When Harry was born, Charles allegedly said, "Oh God, it's a boy, and he's even got red hair." This comment, coupled with her husband's coldness, confirmed Diana's worst fears. She felt rejected, and her marriage, which had started with so many promises, was slowly crumbling before the world's eyes. By 1986, Diana and Charles's marriage had become a facade. Public engagements turned into a painful choreography with cold glances and a palpable awkwardness between them. The public began to notice the tension. The ever-watchful press published articles detailing the failure of the relationship. The resumption of the affair between Charles and Camilla became an open secret within the royal family, though it would take some time for the tabloids to confirm it. Charles, who had tried unsuccessfully to maintain a distance, returned to seek comfort in his lifelong love. But the story of infidelity was not one-sided. The script of her life did not cast her solely as a victim. Diana, feeling hurt and betrayed, also sought solace in other arms. The first, according to some, was her bodyguard, Sergeant Barry Manakee, in 1985. The relationship, said to be more emotional than physical, was close enough for royal staff to notice the connection. Manakee was reassigned in 1986 and died shortly after in a motorcycle accident. Diana, in tapes recorded for her biographer, would later confess that she had been deeply in love with a man around that time, and his death devastated her. Diana's most well-known and public affair was with her riding instructor, Major James Hewitt. The relationship began around 1986 and lasted until 1991. Hewitt was a man who, unlike Charles, gave her the attention and affection she craved. The affair, though publicly denied for years, was later confirmed by both in interviews. Hewitt even published a book about the relationship. Rumors emerged that Harry, due to his red hair, was actually Hewitt's son. But these were debunked by Hewitt himself, who stated his affair with Diana began 2 years after Harry's birth. Diana's life was at a boiling point. While Charles took refuge with Camilla, Diana sought comfort in her own affairs. Her marriage was a prison, and both, in their own ways, were looking for a way out. The public, unaware of the complexities of the royal couple's private lives, only saw the coldness of their joint appearances and their growing distance. It was a delicate dance, a public spectacle of a marriage disintegrating, with two people who, each in their own way, were searching for something they couldn't find in each other. The world was preparing to witness the collapse of a marriage that had begun as the greatest fairy tale in history. All of this, however, was not enough for the public to understand the magnitude of the problems. The story needed a voice to reveal the truth, and that voice would appear at the most critical moment to destabilize the royalty. The Queen's Annus Horribilis was just beginning. In 1992, the fragile facade of Charles and Diana's marriage collapsed completely. The press had already reported on their growing distance, but the events of that year elevated the crisis to an unprecedented level. Queen Elizabeth II, in a history-making speech, referred to 1992 as her Annus Horribilis, her horrible year. And for good reason. Not only did the unions of her children, Prince Andrew and Princess Anne, collapse, but the crisis in Charles and Diana's marriage erupted irreversibly. The trigger was the publication of the book Diana, Her True Story by Andrew Morton. What many saw as mere royal gossip was actually Diana's voice, who had covertly collaborated on the book through her friend, Dr. James Colthurst. In the book, Diana confessed to the psychological abuse she suffered, her struggle with bulimia, and her despair over Charles's relationship with Camilla. She revealed the story of the bracelet with the initials G and F and the deep betrayal she felt. The book was a shock to the public. The press, which had painted Diana as a naive figure, now saw her as a vulnerable victim. The revelation of Diana's illness generated a wave of empathy. However, for the Queen and Buckingham Palace, this was a public humiliation, a break of the golden rule. Never complain, never explain. The palace, in its attempt to contain the crisis, denied any involvement by Diana in the book, but the damage was already done. The situation escalated in August when a private recording between Diana and a childhood friend, James Gilby, was leaked to the press. On the tape known as Squidgygate, Diana spoke of feeling tortured and trapped in the marriage. Her vulnerability was palpable. The recordings were further proof of her unhappiness, and although an affair was not confirmed, her affectionate and desperate tone resonated worldwide. In November, a final attempt to project an image of unity failed miserably during a tour in South Korea. Photos of the couple, showing palpable discomfort, earned them the nickname the Glums. The failure was evident, and 2 weeks later, at the Queen's request, Prime Minister John Major announced their official separation, although it was stressed that no third party was involved. A claim that would soon be disproven. The fairy tale was over for good. The separation did not bring peace. In January 1993, an intimate 1989 recording between Charles and Camilla was leaked, exposing embarrassing conversations for the prince and the love they had for each other. This Camilla Gate was a devastating blow to the image of Charles and Camilla, who was vilified by the press as the other woman. For Diana, this was a moment of catharsis. Behind the scenes, the princess told her bodyguard, "Game, set, and match." Confident that she had won the battle for public opinion, Diana focused on her duties. In 1993, she visited a leprosy hospital in Nepal. Unlike the distant approach of royal protocols, she sat down and shook the hands of patients, a clear sign of her commitment to eliminating the stigma of the disease. Her popularity, in fact, was growing. However, the media pressure was unbearable. In December 1993, she announced she was retiring from public life to find a balance between her duties and her privacy. On June 29, 1994, Prince Charles tried to save his image. In an interview with journalist Jonathan Dimbleby, he publicly admitted to being unfaithful to Diana, although he added it was only after the marriage was irretrievably broken down. To the public, it wasn't new information, but hearing it from his own mouth was shocking. That same night, Diana attended a dinner at the Serpentine Gallery in London, wearing a bold, form-fitting black dress by Christina Stambolian with an off-the-shoulder neckline. This look, a radical break from royal conservatism, was instantly dubbed the revenge dress. Instead of hiding in shame, Diana appeared confident and powerful, sending a message to the world and her husband. She was not a victim. She was free and taking back control of her life. The divorce negotiations continued, complicated by Diana's BBC interview in November 1995. In it, Diana spoke about her bulimia, Charles's infidelities, and her relationship with James Hewitt. The interview, watched by over 20 million people, was devastating for the monarchy. Diana revealed she didn't think Charles was fit to be king and famously declared, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." An exhausted Queen Elizabeth II wrote to the couple, asking them to divorce immediately. The terms of the divorce were agreed upon in August 1996. Diana received a lump sum payment of £17 million and an annual pension. She was able to keep the title Princess of Wales, but lost her Royal Highness, a move many considered petty. Freed from the constraints of royal life, Diana launched into a new phase of her life. Her humanitarian activism became her main focus. In January 1997, she visited Angola as a patron of the Halo Trust. Photos of her walking through a minefield in a flak jacket and helmet went around the world. Her brave act brought global attention to the horror of anti-personnel landmines that maimed and killed innocent people, especially children. A member of the British Ministry of Defence criticized her for interfering in politics, but the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Diana had not only humanized the cause, but had used her fame to generate real change in public opinion. Her charity work was a reflection of her own life, of her empathy and her ability to connect with the vulnerable. She visited AIDS patients, breaking the stigma by touching and hugging patients without gloves, an image that was seared into the minds of millions. Her genuine empathy was her greatest asset. Someone who had suffered so much in private could understand the pain of others in public. She became the Queen of Hearts, as she would later be called after her interview. Diana continued to live at Kensington Palace. Her relationships with influential figures, from musician Elton John to designer Gianni Versace, became public. Her love life was also the subject of constant scrutiny. She was romantically linked to Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, whom she came to describe as the love of my life. However, the relationship reportedly ended because Khan could not stand the press harassment. Shortly after, Diana began dating Dodi Fayed, the wealthy son of the owner of Harrods department store. In the summer of 1997, Diana and her son spent a vacation with Dodi in France, where the couple was photographed kissing. This moment was a media bombshell. The paparazzi, freelance photographers who sold their images to newspapers, became more aggressive. Diana had become their primary target, and the pursuit was relentless. On August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi Fayed had dinner at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. As they left, a group of paparazzi on motorcycles was waiting for them. With driver Henry Paul at the wheel and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones in the passenger seat, they tried to evade the photographers. In their desperate escape, the vehicle crashed into a tunnel pillar. The tragedy was instantaneous. Paul and Dodi were killed on impact. Rees-Jones was the sole survivor, though gravely injured. Diana, though conscious, was found by Dr. Frederick Miley, who was passing by. He found her on the floor of the car, complaining of pain before her heart stopped. Despite the efforts of the emergency team and a 4-hour surgery at the hospital, Diana, Princess of Wales, was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. on August 31st, 1997. She was 36 years old. The news of her death plunged the world into a state of mourning and shock. Suspicions arose, with conspiracy theories suggesting it had been an assassination. Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, maintained that the British MI6 had orchestrated the crash. However, years later, Operation Paget, an exhaustive official investigation by London's Metropolitan Police, concluded that the deaths of Diana and Dodi were an unlawful killing due to grossly negligent driving. The investigation found that the driver, Henry Paul, was under the influence of alcohol and prescription drugs, and that the crash was caused by a combination of his reckless driving and the pursuit by the paparazzi. The investigation also debunked the rumor that Diana was pregnant. On September 6, 1997, more than 1 million people gathered on the streets of London for Diana's funeral. An estimated 2.5 billion people watched the televised ceremony worldwide. The British people, in an unprecedented collective grief, gave the Queen a silent ultimatum. Emotion had to be shown. The Queen, who had initially remained distant at Balmoral, bowed to the pressure. She lowered the flag to half-mast and appeared in public to pay tribute to the woman who, for many, was the people's princess. Diana is remembered as a fashion icon, a force of nature in philanthropy, and a dedicated mother. Her style, from her daytime suits to her glamorous evening gowns, revolutionized royal fashion. But her true legacy was her ability to use her fame for good. She dared to hug the sick, to touch lepers, and to give a voice to the voiceless. Her empathy and her approachability made her a beloved figure worldwide, perceived as a bridge between the rigid system of the monarchy and everyday life. Diana's story was not just a family drama. It was a reflection of the 20th century, of a society torn between tradition and modernity, between the coldness of duty and the warmth of emotion. Diana, in some way, embodied both sides. In retrospect, her marriage to Charles was an ill-advised decision, a union between two people who wanted fundamentally different things from life. The story of Charles and Camilla, on the other hand, had a happier ending. On April 9, 2005, Prince Charles married Camilla in a civil ceremony, a union that was accepted by the royalty and the public, though not without controversy. In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II announced that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when Charles took the throne. With the Queen's death in September 2022 and the accession of Charles III, Camilla became queen consort. At Charles's coronation in 2023, his son, Prince William, became heir to the throne, and his wife Catherine became the new Princess of Wales. Diana's story, in a way, was repeating itself in the next generation, with the royalty still grappling with its role in a modern society. Diana's life was an extraordinary journey, from a shy girl to a fairy tale princess. A loving mother, a tireless activist, and finally, an icon whose death moved the world. The princess, who was not afraid to break with protocol, remains a powerful reminder that empathy, vulnerability, and compassion can be far more powerful than any crown. Diana was a dramatic reflection of a society in transition. Her story, which began as a fairy tale, became a modern tragedy, one that exposed the deep cracks between tradition and modernity. At the end of the day, Diana wasn't just a princess. She was the personification of human vulnerability under relentless scrutiny. Her struggle with bulimia, her desperation in an unhappy marriage, and her tireless search for empathy resonated with millions of people who felt invisible in their own lives. She became a bridge, connecting the unattainable monarchy with the pain and joys of the common person. She knelt to speak to children. She touched the hands of AIDS patients and walked through minefields, using her platform not to maintain distance, but to shorten it. Her legacy is complex, at times contradictory. For some, she was a figure who betrayed the monarchy by airing her personal problems in public. For others, she was a heroine who, with her honesty, forced a rigid institution to evolve and show a more human side. What is undeniable is that the royal family was never the same after her. Diana's story forces us to ask what price fame carries, and at what cost can one break with tradition. Her life was a reminder that even on the highest pedestal, people face internal battles, and that sometimes the heart can be the most revolutionary force of all. Her memory endures not for the crown she wore, but for the impact she left on the hearts of people around the world. The fairy tale faded, but the Princess of Hearts lives forever. Thank you for traveling with us through the fascinating and tragic life of Princess Diana. If you were moved by this story and are passionate about biographies that reveal the truth behind the legends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. That way, you won't miss our upcoming videos and can discover more fascinating stories of figures who, just like Diana, changed the world. See you in the next story.